Please join in the chalice lighting words that will be shown on your screen. Welcoming all free seekers of truth and meaning, we gather to excite the human spirit, to inspire its growth and development, to respond morally and ethically to a troubled world, and to sustain a vital and nurturing religious community. Now let us sing together. The words will appear on your screen. Randy Rosette and Chris Jensen will lead us in singing Our World is One World. We enjoy welcoming guests and visitors to our service. If you are a guest or visitor and would like to tell us who you are and where you're from, you can click on the blue raise hand symbol in the participant window. Our technician will unmute you and invite you to speak. You may also, or instead, click on the visitor link you'll find now in the chat window. Are there guests and visitors?
Well, we certainly welcome all of our friends and colleagues from UU Saratoga Springs, but there aren't any that I see that have put up their hand to be recognized. So let's move on.
Thanks, and welcome to all of you. If you'd like to learn more about our congregation or Unitarian Universalism, you can find in the participant window someone with welcome before their name. You can reach out to that person in the chat window now or after the service. You can also at any time connect to the visitor link or get more information about our congregation from our website, albanyuu.org. We welcome the chance to greet each other. In our Zoom format, we do this in virtual breakout rooms where you can say hello and share your name. This will last about 90 seconds and then we'll all come back together again. This is the time set aside in our service for sharing significant personal milestones in our lives. If we were in Community Hall, you would be invited to come forward to move a stone. If you'd like to share your joy or sorrow with us, there's still several ways you can do that. Joys and sorrows can be shared at any time on our website. We'll read first those that have been submitted over the past week. And you can at this time type your joy or sorrow in the chat window. Please put the words "read aloud" at the beginning of your message if you would like us to do that, and they will be read shortly by a pastoral care associate. You can instead connect privately in the chat with the pastoral care associate on duty today, Donna Meixner. Look for her in the participant window with PCA before her name. Or another option is to click the blue raise hand symbol in the participant window. Our technician will unmute you and invite you to share your joy or sorrow.
And we begin with a joy and sorrow shared by Marilyn and Arden Doctor, and they say that they would like to thank everyone for the support. We are slowly recovering. Others who would like to share a joy and sorrow, raise your hand, your blue hand. Okay. Kathy, go ahead.
Hey, I'm Kathy DeMille, and I wanted to say that my daughter Virginia got to go to Wolf Trap Opera for a summer residency, which they quarantined, and they're going to be live streaming the performances in September. And those of you who know her and want to see, contact me. I'll give you the dates. But the most amazing thing is that Wolf Trap has decided to bring everyone back next summer and redo the residency because the performers, the artists, were unable to perform publicly. They're going to bring every artist back next summer. They offered them the jobs again. So no auditions. So Virginia will have another Wolf Trap summer, but hopefully it will not be a pandemic one. So she's just delighted. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Kathy. I don't see any more, so we can move on to the chat joys and sorrows.
So Tom Hodelin and Tanya will celebrate their 52nd wedding anniversary tomorrow. Congratulations to both of you. And oh my goodness, it's a big time for anniversaries. Leah Purcell says that she and Kevin are celebrating their 35th wedding anniversary tomorrow. Tomorrow's a big day. And I do not see any others, Chris.
All right. Moving on.
For the joys and sorrows that remain unspoken, let us hold all that we've heard and felt in our hearts.
I began our service this morning with a call to celebration. I shared with you this gift that I received from your minister when I was ordained in Albany in March of 2011. A statue of Superman. For the spoken meditation, I'd like to invite you to meditate on the life of Christopher Reeve, who was Superman in the movie. Christopher Reeve experienced tragedy in 1995 in a horse accident when he was thrown from a horse and suffered a broken spinal cord, leaving him paralyzed from the neck down and in a condition where he needed to live on a ventilator. And that is how he lived for the last decade of his life. Christopher Reeve and his wife, Dana Reeve, their story intersects with our own. They attended the Westport Unitarian congregation in Connecticut. And when Christopher Reeve tragically died at the age of 52 years old, Frank Hall, the Reverend Frank Hall, offered the memorial service for Christopher Reeve at the Westport Unitarian congregation. I invite us to reflect on the life of Christopher Reeve and what it means to be a hero. I put words on the screen. These are words that Christopher Reeve said before his death, how his definition of a hero changed. I think a hero, he says, is an ordinary individual who finds the strength to persevere and endure in spite of overwhelming obstacles. They are the real heroes, and so are the families and friends who have stood by them. In the last decade of his life, while he was a quadriplegic in a wheelchair, living on a ventilator, Christopher Reeve started a foundation. And I'm going to share a picture of the website of the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation, dedicating himself to improving the lives of people with disabilities. Despite this incredible challenge in his life, he adapted and found purpose and meaning that enabled him to endure and thrive in the midst of challenge. We'll now have a video presentation. We can reflect on the challenges we face, the resources for our own strength that allow us to endure and thrive. raindrops put us in the mood for a rather sober read this morning. It comes from a report by the Unitarian Universalist Association Commission on Institutional Change. And it provides us some insight about institutional racism within our own faith community. I quote, "Many of our congregations are in trouble. With dwindling membership, participation, and financial contributions, and a factor that contributes to this decline is our inability to address issues of inclusion, equity, and diversity. Institutional changes required are extensive. Covenant and commitment, not comfort, should be the binding fabric of Unitarian Universalist congregations." I'm going to repeat that last part because I love it. Covenant and commitment, not comfort, should be the binding fabric of Unitarian Universalist congregations.
An important way we celebrate life each Sunday is by offering an opportunity to practice generosity. Members and friends support our congregation with an annual pledge paid throughout the year. Another way to support the good work of this congregation is by making a generous donation via one of the options shown on this slide. You can click on the tiny URL link in the chat window to donate, or you can send a text to the number shown on this screen. The examples on this slide show how to label your text to indicate the amount and the purpose or intent of your gift. Our offertory music is Frédéric Chopin's Raindrop Prelude, presented by Elena Karpov.
Our adaptive challenge. For honeybees, the Asian giant hornet presents an adaptive challenge. When a pack of Asian giant hornets targets a hive of honeybees for slaughter, the carnage can be swift. The so-called murder hornets, which have surfaced for the first time in the United States, have a particular appetite for bees, and they specialize in group attacks. The slaughter begins when one worker hornet spots a colony and marks it with a pheromone, and then brings back a crew of between 2 and 50 others. While a honeybee hive can have thousands of residents, these hornets can wipe out the whole population in hours. During one recorded slaughter, each hornet killed one bee every 14 seconds. They used their powerful mandibles to decapitate their prey. But some bees have demonstrated a remarkable survival strategy. They've adapted by working as a team to fight back against individual invaders. When a hornet enters the hive of Japanese honeybees, hundreds of bees form a ball around the hornet. While the bees face an immense disadvantage both in size and in strength, the bees working in unison can vibrate to produce heat, raising the temperature in the formation like a tiny oven to 115 degrees. The bees can survive the heat, but the hornet cannot. And after up to an hour of cooking, the hornet dies. European honeybees, which are the more common pollinators in the United States, have not developed this adaptation. They try to defend against a hornet attack using the traditional way of their defense, by stinging the invaders. But the Asian giant hornet has a rigid exoskeleton that makes bee stings ineffective. The Japanese honeybee, on the other hand, has adapted and learned through generations to protect itself, to endure this challenge, and to thrive. I came across this story in the New York Times. Attribution goes to Mike Baker. And I share it because it holds vital lessons for us as a religious community and as a people about adaptation. Let me introduce a few key concepts, and I'll put the definitions up on the screen. I've learned and been learning about adaptation from Ronald Heifetz, who's a leadership teacher out of Harvard University. There's a few key concepts that are helpful to understand. Adaptation, adaptive capacity, adaptive challenge, adaptive work, and an experimental mindset. This is the source of these definitions, this book called The Practice of Adaptive Leadership. Adaptation is what enables an organism to thrive in a new or challenging environment. Part of the adaptive process is conservative, and part of it is progressive. The conservative is taking the best from our traditions. The progressive is the experimental, the innovative. It's what the Japanese honeybees learned to do in forming that ball around the hornet. The Japanese honeybee showed a remarkable adaptive capacity. That has to do with being able to engage in problem-solving work in the midst of adaptive pressures. And that hornet invading the honeybee hive, I can't imagine a greater adaptive pressure for the survival of that colony. Adaptive challenges are the gap between the values people stand for and the reality we face. In order to respond effectively to an adaptive challenge, we have to do what's called adaptive work. Adaptive work means entering into the disequilibrium, doing the work to identify the cultural DNA that we need to conserve, as well as the cultural DNA that we need to discard. That will enable us to thrive. It's a learning process, the process of adaptive work. Perhaps the most important element of this is having an experimental mindset. Testing a hypothesis, observing what happens, learning and making mid-course corrections. Adaptive challenges, facing them effectively, requires that we have such an experimental mindset. Pandemic has created disequilibrium in our lives. Now, how much this pandemic has impacted us depends largely upon the extent of our privilege. 4 months ago, when the pandemic was surging in Philadelphia, where I live and work, I encountered Terrence, a kitchen worker at the hospital. He was staring out the window that overlooks the medical examiner's office and the parking lot that is now the site of 3 refrigerator trucks, mobile morgues. That was an adaptation of the examiner's office. They didn't have the capacity. They had to experiment with new ways of handling the flow of the dead. I stood beside Terrence and we watched out the window together as men in masks carried a corpse from one of the trucks and loaded it in the back of a hearse. Then he averted his gaze. He said, "I've lost 6 family members in 96 hours to this virus. I can't watch this." And he rushed down the hall. I followed him. I found him in the dining hall and invited him to my office. I asked him the names of the dead and his relationship to them. His father died. 2 uncles died. 3 cousins died. He asked for prayer, and I offered it. And before he left, I gave him a polished stone from a dish I keep in my office. Each stone is engraved with a word, and Terrence chose charity in memory of his father. Terrence lost 6 family members, 6 men, 6 black men. My encounter with Terrence forced me to confront an uncomfortable truth about this virus, the COVID-19 race gap. Black men are dying at a greater rate than any other demographic. Chronic stress is part of the problem. Chronic stress lowers our body's ability to fight off an infection, and many blacks experience chronic stress due to discrimination, poverty, and structural racism. Mark Morreale, the president of the National Urban League, provides us some context for these concerns. Every major crisis or catastrophe, he says, that hits the most vulnerable communities the hardest. Black workers, he says, are more likely to hold the kinds of jobs that cannot be done from home. There's also bias among healthcare workers, institutions, and systems that result in black patients receiving fewer medical procedures and poorer quality medical care than white individuals. And now, with millions out of work, children at home to feed food, and unemployment lines compound the stress. Sadly, the race gap is only the beginning. To find the communities most vulnerable to this pandemic, we need to look beyond the borders of the United States. My home has more than 5,000 ventilators, yet 10 African countries have no ventilators. My home state has more ICU beds than 43 African countries combined. As COVID-19 spreads globally, people living in conflict zones will be hit the hardest. Syria, Yemen, Afghanistan, and Iraq. Years of violent conflict have weakened healthcare systems and shut down medical facilities, putting millions of people at increased risk. People living in refugee camps in Syria, Greece, and Bangladesh face especially a heightened risk. And then there are the children. The United Nations recently warned of the pandemic's potentially catastrophic impact on the world's children. As health services become overwhelmed, sick children are less able to access care, and as schools remain closed, families lose income, food resources become harder to secure, and the healthcare needs of children go unmet. This is the truth of the moment I have come to accept. It's an uncomfortable truth. I do not belong to one of the communities most vulnerable to this pandemic. I'm white, unemployed. My children have access to healthy food and health care. I got my COVID test without waiting in a line, and in less than 24 hours, I found out the results, negative. But if I do get sick and need to be hospitalized, I live in a community with an abundance of ICU beds, with available ventilators. For all these reasons, I have come to accept that I belong to the pandemically privileged. This pandemic is an adaptive challenge. What is emerging from this catastrophe is the gap between the values we stand for as a religious community, values like inclusion, equity, diversity, and the reality we face. And the feeling that I carry in my gut is one of moral pain, disgust, anger, and even some guilt. In order to rise to our adaptive challenge, we need to engage in adaptive work. Live into the disequilibrium. Enter uncomfortable states of uncertainty, disorder, conflict, and chaos. I'm not saying we should be overwhelmed by all that's going on. We can't allow ourselves to be overwhelmed. Yet we need to be able to move outside of our comfort zone in order to mobilize to address adaptive challenges. I leave you with some questions for reflection. What is essential to this congregation, to our denomination, that needs to endure? I believe our covenant and commitment to it are essential. What is dispensable and should be abandoned? I believe our personal comfort, our need for comfort, we need to let go of that. What cultural DNA do we need to conserve? And what do we need to discard? What innovations do we need to implement to adapt to our new reality? And what new cultural DNA needs to be invented or discovered to enable our congregations and the larger communities in which we live to thrive?
Next, we will sing together with the words appearing on your screen. Please join in singing one more step with Chris Jensen and Randy Rosette leading us. As we extinguish the chalice, please join in the words shown on your screen. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Covenant, commit, live in service to our principles and purposes. Embrace uncertainty, discomfort. Experiment, bear pain together. Work for greater inclusion, equity, and diversity. Widen the circle of concern so that all may thrive.
And in addition to thanking Reverend Antal for this service, we would like to thank our volunteers, our ushers, Kristen Abbas, Sharon Babala, Fred Eames, and Jean Poppy, our pastoral care associate, Donna Meixner, our welcomer, Don Odell, our musicians, Elena Karpoff, Randy Rosette, Chris Jensen, office support by Sapphire Korea, our technical support by Chris Jensen, and Randy Rosette is our summer service coordinator. Thanks to them all. And we have one announcement. Ella